I started the webcast. All right. All right, let's begin. Welcome to lecture 7 of the Ruby on Rails Decal. Can you guys hear me in the back? Drew, can you hear me? Am I okay? Yeah? Okay. I'll make sure you guys can hear me. How about now? How about now? It's not the mic, it's the receiver. Yeah, I'm like talking into it. Can I just yell at you guys? All right. Drew, can you hear me in the back? Kind of? Man, this is kind of hard. All right, can I just ask you guys to all move forward since my mic is like not really behaving and my voice is like sort of going out. So please come forward, thanks. Yeah, let's just fill in all the front half, okay? If you're in the back half, move to the front half so I don't have to talk like as loud. Thank you guys. Please move on. If you're charging your laptops, you don't have to because you can just listen, and that'd be great. Yeah. Cool. Thank you guys. All right, cool. Today, I'm going to be talking about best practices when it comes to style, best practices when it comes to routing, and other things that eventually will matter for you when you work on a project with a team. I'm also going to be talking about gems. Gems are Ruby's equivalent of libraries, okay? And so the reason why I talk about them is because you're going to be using them in your own projects later on. And these things are like not the typical like, oh, CRUD, and like this is how to structure a web application thing. This is pretty much just like a hacker's guide to best practices in gems. So let's get started. So best practices are important. They're not only important because you might get attacked by T-Rex. They are important because basically it's the way that we have agreed to do things. And when the code doesn't look the way or like other things like that, it just slows you down when you're like working on someone else's code. So like, for example, if you and your partner are working on a Java project and your partner writes all of his code on one huge line, right? It's going to take you a long time to parse and like really think about. In a similar way, the reason why we have these practices is not because it's not so we can be like, no, this is bad and this is good. It's really to help you guys. Okay? Cool. So we're going to talk first about style. These are just little things that I've noticed as I've been grading the homeworks and like looking through you guys' code. So overall, you guys are doing a great job. These are little things that you can tweak that will help me not cry as much. Okay, so please do not use tab characters. The reason why is because, so the difference between tab characters is like, if you like open it up in Sublime and you highlight all your spaces, you'll notice that some of the spaces have like a line, right? And other spaces have like dots. The dots are spaces. Those are good. Those are your friend. Okay, the lines are tab characters. Those are your enemies. You do not want tab characters in your code. simply because they do not display the same way on other computers. If you notice when you push GitHub and you have tab characters, you'll have like code that's indented like way out here, and then code that's indented like normally if you have spaces. So just use 2 spaces, please. Another thing I noticed, this is not as common, but some people try to use like camel case for variable names. Please just use, so snake case is lowercase, and then use underscores to separate words. Camel case is like capital, and you use capitals to separate words, okay? I feel like I'm teaching English, but this is just what it is. This is the convention, so please stick to it. So when people look at your code, they can say, oh, like this is clearly a variable name or a method name, and this is like clearly a class name. So it saves you some confusion. This one is kind of not as important, but it's nice to have spaces around operators and braces. So if you have braces, you should have like 1 space in between, just for consistency purposes, and because it looks nicer. And here we go. So string interpolation is this nice thing in Ruby where you can essentially evaluate Ruby inside of strings and then get the return value. Okay, so what happens here is I set a variable called test equals like some string, and then this string right here will evaluate to use string interpolation when possible. Okay, so it's generally nicer to look at this than to look at use plus test plus when possible, as you would in Java or JavaScript. Cool. So kind of quick and easy. These are just little things. So which of these will I not cry about? So take a minute. When you're ready, hold out your fist, and then give me a 1, 2, 3, or 4 corresponding to what you think is the right answer. Just raise up your fist when you're ready, so I know. All right, so show me your answer. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so the answer is 4. As I have just mentioned, 1, you should use string interpolation. Not only does it suck because you didn't use string interpolation, but it also sucks because I didn't put spaces after the this and space before the sucks. So what the actual full string would be, this really sucks, as like 1 long word, and that's kind of lame. It's better just to use string interpolation so you don't have to deal with like those edge cases with spaces. It's just nicer. B, you should have a space after the brace. That's all I have to say about it. For 3, variable 2 is a variable, use snake case. And 4 is fine because it uses the correct snake case for the method name. It omits the return when you can, and then it's used, well, you can't see it here, but it's indented like with 2 spaces. Any questions? Yeah.
So would it be good sell to use like .cat plus?
Never.
What is the existing language?
It exists in language because people are used to having it. So you'll notice that in Ruby, you have a lot of methods that do the exact same thing. For example, like array.length, array.count, there's like other methods, and they all do the exact same thing. The reason is Ruby is like, the way it was designed was just kind of to be nice to people. So if you like guess at if you're trying to get the length of an array and you just guess the method, you'll probably get it right. In a similar way, the plus works, but in general, like string interpolation is just nicer to look at and to reason about. Any other questions about this? Just little things, but do pay attention. Great. Cool. Another thing is every file should have a purpose. So I noticed that in the homeworks, a lot of you guys left files that were never used. So you should put those files out of their misery by deleting them. Every file should have a purpose, and it should be like used at some point in your application. Otherwise, why bother having it? For example, create.html.erb should not exist. Because in your controller's create action, you're either going to render the new view or you're going to redirect to somewhere else. You're never actually going to submit a form and then get a view for that action specifically. A lot of you guys, like when you generated files, you guys like had like a users fixtures.yaml and like users spec or users test.rb, and you guys just kind of left those blank or didn't really know what to do with them. Just delete them if you're not using them. So you notice that when you generate files in Rails, Rails gives you a bunch of stuff. There is a way to configure it so it doesn't give you stuff that you don't want. But in the meantime, like if it gives you unneeded files, just delete them. Okay? If it generates files that end up like empty or blank, just delete them and keep your like file system clean. Cool. So let's talk about routing. Routing was kind of the concerns that were brought up in you guys' homework responses. So technically, Rails allows you to define whatever routes you want. Okay, so routing is kind of this thing that's separate from the rest of your application in that it's not really connected to any controllers by like default. You can connect them yourself. So you can write something that looks like this. So I can get /user/hello. I can route it to the admin controller goodbye method, and then in my app I can call it the foobar path. And this will work fine, but really, like when you look at this, it's not really clear what it's doing. And there are a couple of reasons for that, right? One reason is, why is it that when I have user, and why is it that when I do /hello it goes to goodbye? And then why is the whole thing called foobar? So all those things you can define yourself, yes, but it's best to stick to something that you can remember for later. So ideally a good route, I will be able to look at the route and take a pretty good guess at where the code is for that action. Okay, so if I look at users/hello, my guess is users controller hello action, like maybe hello view, right? And it should be called something like hello users path. And that's kind of the goal that you're looking for when you're defining routes. So let's talk about how you can do these correctly. If you just don't want to listen and keep doing this, your routes may end up looking like that. You really won't know where they're going. Cool. So let's talk about routing. So we mentioned earlier in previous weeks that that you can use resources as a shorthand. Okay. So the key thing to remember is that resources resources is not magic. It's just a shortcut for things you could define on your own. Okay. So if I do resources students, the routes that will be generated are these. And these routes I can define on their own. I can go like, oh, I can get /students to the students controller in next action. I can get students/id/edit to the edit action. The reason why this exists in the first place is because this is so common that Rails, the creator of Rails, was just like, let's just keep it as like a shortcut for people to use so they can like write less code, basically. The reason why it's called resources is because we consider students a resource in the application. Okay, so students usually corresponds to a model. Model objects you can perform create, read, update, destroy actions on. These routes just encode that functionality, basically, like more or less. Okay, so every one of these routes corresponds to something relating to creating, reading, updating, or destroying a student. Yeah.
Is there a style to use resources? You only define one of these things, like you only want to do something, then use that second line there, or is it better to write out
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question was, so here, okay, so I didn't get to this part, but here, if you want to restrict the routes that you generate, so for example, if you never want students to be, if you only want students to be shown, then you can like do only show, and it'll only create the show path. And the question was, is it really necessary to like write this if I only do show? Can I just write like get students ID? And like that case is kind of iffy because there's no real like good metric of like, oh, you write more lines of code or whatever. But in general, I would kind of recommend you to stick to this one just because it's easier to look at right away and know what it does. if you write get student slash ID slash show, you probably think about it a little bit, like, oh, this is like showing a student to the showing a student. Whereas if I do this, it's like, oh, clearly I'm going to be showing a student, and this is the only possibility for it. And it's a little bit better because in the case that you want to later on include like more actions like index or update, you can just add it to this array and it'll update accordingly. Okay, so it's nice and it's useful, but it also talks a little bit more. So if you look into this, it also specifies a little bit more about a good way to specify routes. And that kind of methodology is to keep everything resourceful. That means that every route in an application, that's not true for all the routes in the application. For example, your home page and etc. But it tends to be the case that in most applications, most of the routes are changing or updating a model. And because of that, we want to keep our routes centered around our models, instead of defining arbitrary routes that then do arbitrary things. So resources students generates a cool list of routes, but what if I want to add more? The way to do that, a clean way to do that is to use member and collection routes to define more actions. Okay, so this is an example of what you can do. So essentially, a member route means this route will operate on one guide. So in this case, the member route will operate on one email. That's why you have the ID in the route. The collection route operates on a collection of objects. Otherwise, like a collection of emails. So that's why the route looks like emails/archive. So if you look at this route by itself, you can kind of think to yourself like, oh, like I'm looking at all the emails that are archived. Okay, it sort of reads that way. If you look at this route up here, this looks like I'm taking a specific email and I'm archiving. So that's the difference between member and collection. And this effectively allows you to define routes that like make sense. So this right here is shorthand for that route up there. So if I do member, so first notice that this is inside our resources emails. If you give a block to the resources emails, it essentially means define some more routes that operate on emails. Okay? Inside of this, then you can specify other routes that have to do with emails. So when I say member do post archive, this will create this route, which automatically routes the emails #archive controller, and the route will be called in the app. It will be called archive email path. So this is kind of like the ideal of what we're looking for, in that if I write this, the route makes sense. Where the route goes to, the controller that the route goes to makes sense, and the route name makes sense. So essentially, Rails is doing some heavy lifting for you here, and just making a route that makes sense. That if you look at it for the first time, you can kind of figure out where it goes. So if I look at this URL, I can say, okay, emails controller, like archive action, is operating on one email. Yeah.
So does this add on to all the other routes that are created?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The answer is yes. So resources emails will define all the regular resources emails routes. And these routes will be in addition. So you can use like this in combination with the things that you've seen before. So if you do like resources emails only show index, then it'll only create the show and index CRUD operations, but it'll also create everything you define here. So both the archived and the archived routes. Any other questions about this? Any other questions about routing in general? This is typically a topic of like confusion for people, and it'd be great if we can like just clear up some of that confusion right now. Okay. Good. So now let's talk about gems. Gems in Ruby are pretty much just libraries that make your life better, or do some task for you. So I'm first going to talk about development gems. So what I mean by development gems, is that these are gems that help you as you develop an application. Okay, so there are a couple of terms that we use when we talk about developing applications, and those are like development, production, and test. What we refer to when we say like test environment, development environment, production environment is this. The development environment is you, the programmer, working on the application, developing the application. So it's development. The test environment is the app running some tests for the application. And then the production environment is the app running on a server to actual users. Okay? So that's the difference between those three. And what happens is that the reason why we separate them in the first place is because the things that are in development are probably not the same as the things in production. For example, in development, you might not actually want to upload images to like Amazon, but in production, you definitely want to do that. Or in testing, you don't want to actually like be able to hit the Facebook API to like test something, but in production you do. So these things change between different environments. So you can think of an environment as just kind of like the configuration for a specific setting of your application. Okay, so when I talk about development environments, I'm just talking about gems that help you as a programmer when you're working on an application. Cool. So these are really nice. They're so nice that we're going to be including them from the homework and projects from now on. So I'm giving you guys the background, so when you see it in the homework and the projects, you'll know like, oh, hey, like this gem is doing this nice thing for me. Okay? So let's talk about it. So the first gem I want to talk about is pry and pry by bug. Pry is this really amazing gem that essentially allows you to like, you can like CD into a class, and you can like do ls to inspect its methods and variables. It's really cool. So I'm just gonna list them out right here, and then I'm gonna have a demo where I demonstrate all these one by one. So I'm gonna go through these pretty quick. So pry and pry by bug. You can also use it as a debugging tool, which I will show. Okay. Acquired assets. So if you notice when you do Rails S and you hit like localhost 3000, your Rails S gives you like some like really long outputs of like, oh, like I gave you application.css, I gave you application.js, I gave you bootstrap.css, I gave you bootstrap.js. So acquired assets just like shuts all of that down and just gives you the necessary information you need to know. So pretty handy. Annotate is a gem that essentially sticks information about your model. It just gives you like, it just documents your models for you based on the database. So it's pretty nice. Spring will make your commands run really fast. So like all your commands, including Rails C, Rails server, rake migrate, all of these things will run much faster when you use Spring. Better Errors gives you awesome error pages with an interactive console, so you can inspect the variables at the time of the error. And Guard watches for file changes and does some action when files change. So that was a lot, but let's just see them in action. Okay. I'm going to go over here. Let's start. So by default, Rails includes the Spring gem. So I can just show you guys how that works. Yeah, great. Okay, so here it is. First, I run bundle, and everything's installed. So the way Spring works is that I can do Spring status, and it will show me stuff that's running. So I'm going to do Spring stop so I can reset everything. So essentially what Spring is doing is that it loads your application, and then you can run commands against your application. Normally when you run rake migrate by itself, it will load the entire application, run rake migrate, and then like throw what it loaded away. And if you do like Rails S, it'll load your entire application again. And then if you do Rails console, it'll load your entire application again. So that stuff takes a while. And what Spring does is it offloads that in the background, so your commands will run faster. So here's how it works. It's just, so if you do Spring help, I think when you do a Rails application, it will automatically do this for you. But basically, Spring bin stub will kind of like do some changes to the commands that you have so that they'll run using Spring. So if I do rake Spring bin stub all, I've already done it for this application, but Rake and Rails are now like using Spring. So if I look at Spring status, Spring is not running, or it is running, but okay, let's stop it again. And if I do bin Rails server and I wait, it starts up. So if I do bin Rails console, let me see if you can see a difference in the time it takes for this one. It takes a little while and then it loads. Now if I run it again, it loads instantly. So that was kind of hard to catch. But basically the way it works is when you run a command for the first time, it will like load the application. And then the second time you run the command or a third time, this application will just stay loaded without having to run it again. So that's why it makes commands run faster. So it's pretty cool. The downside is you do have to run bin like Rails console to actually like make it to use Spring. But you can use aliases for this to make it nicer. Cool. So the second thing I'm going to talk about is pry. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do gem pry Rails. And I'll put pry bybug, which is just a debugger. I'm going to run bundle install again. Okay. Now when I do Rails console, you notice that this changed right here. It says pry now. And the way it works is I can have an array and I can do cool things like this. I can cd into A, and now I'm in the array like class. I can do ls and then see the methods that the array has. This is pretty, I don't know. When I saw this, I was like, this is crazy. But I can look and see like, oh, it has this method, it has this method. So it looks like it's getting some methods from this module called enumerable called like grep. I want to look at, what if I want to look at the source code for grep? I can do that by doing show source grep. Well, it's a core. Okay, so it's a core method. But so the basic idea is I can pretty much like navigate around as if it were a file system and then look at variables and such. So it's pretty awesome. The coolest part about this, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a server. It's bigger. The server is running. Okay. Let me just check. I'm on the wrong commit. Work with me here. I want to check out this guy. Okay, cool. So if I go to my app, I have to run. Okay, sorry about this. From bundle install, it installs my stuff. That's interesting. Wait. Okay, there we go. So start my server again. If I refresh the page, okay, so here's my home page. Okay, I'm going to put in pry Rails and pry bybug. And so what I have here is a pages controller with the home method. I can do binding.pry here. And what that will do is when I refresh, bundle install again. Bundle install, server. Okay, work with me, cross my fingers, refresh. So it stops. If I go to my console, my Rails server has basically just like stopped the execution of my code right here. So this is a breakpoint. Okay? I can now look around at my variables. So if I had some variables here, so @hello equals world. If I do this again, refresh the page, go to my terminal, I can look at the value of @hello. Okay? So essentially, I can like go here. If something's messed up, I can put a breakpoint, check out what's going wrong, and then when I'm ready to continue execution, I can just continue. So it functions as a debugger for your application. So really convenient, really nice. Okay, so you notice here I have a bunch of like assets bootstrap, assets terminals, assets like pop over. Let's get rid of all of those with quiet assets gem. Okay, so bundle server. Now when I refresh the page, oh, I still have this. Well, let's take it out. I refresh the page. I just did that. So it's kind of nice because you can now, you don't have to like wade through this wall of text of like stuff that you don't really care about to look at where stuff is happening in your application. You can just look at here. It looks like the page controller and the home action got run, and then I rendered some HTML. So pretty nice. Let's continue. So annotate. So let's generate a model really quick for this demonstration. So Rails 3 model student. I'm going to give him a name, an email, and a phone number. Okay, and then migrate the whole thing. Great. Darn, what happened? Okay. The students got created. The student model is here. The annotate gem essentially does this. I think it's pretty self-explanatory once I show you. So I installed the gem, I bundle install. Now when I run annotate, it tells me that it annotated the student. So if I check back at my student file, it now has schema information right in the file itself. So I don't have to refer back to the database to figure out what columns are there. I can just look at this file and it's like, oh, name, email, phone. All these things exist for a student. Okay, so that's all it does. Pretty nice. Better errors. And there's a related gem called binding of caller, which I'm also going to pull in. Okay. Oops. Save. Bundle. Server. So what better errors does is it gives you a better error page. So normally when you like have an error in your application, you get like some generic like red bar at the top with some error message that doesn't really help you. So with better errors, if I have an error here, like this error is like a 1 divided by 0 error. If I save and I refresh my page, I get this nice looking error page. Okay, but not only do I get a nice looking error page, I get a console. I can look at what the values of my variables are here. So let me make this bigger. Okay, cool. So at hello is world here. And I can check, well, at error is equal to 1 divided by 0. And if I try this line in my console, I get the same error. So it's like, oh, clearly I must have done something wrong. But it's really nice because you can check what happened. You can check what your variables are at the time that your code executed. And you can check what your parameters are, okay? So if I look at params, it's here. And if I do something like name equals Sam, my parameters, my name will be Sam. So all of this stuff, I can just check interactively in my console, and this saves many hours of like wasteful debugging and looking at error messages. That is not to say that you shouldn't look at error messages. So do read the error message first. This is not like the solution to all your problems, but it's something that helps a lot in a lot of cases. The first thing you should always do when you get an error is read the message, because typically it helps you, and that's what the message is there for. But better errors does give you a hand. Cool. And the last thing I want to talk about is guard. So remove that error. Guard. Let's do guard. So guard is this cool gem that watches your file system for changes, and when your files change, it like does something else. Okay? You can configure it to do a lot of different things. In this case, I'm going to ask guard to refresh my browser when I change a file. Okay, so this is really convenient if I'm like writing some HTML or some CSS. If I save it, I have to go to my browser and like refresh the whole thing to see it changes. With guard running, I can like save the file and then my browser will automatically refresh. Okay, so let's check it out. So guard live reload. I run bundle. The server is running. I start guard. So I have to run guard init first. Yes. Okay. And when I start guard, so guard basically just runs. And what you do is in the browser, so let me just refresh the page so it works. You have to install this plugin for live reload, but once you do, you can click it and the button, so if you click it, like this used to be like not filled in, and then when you click it, it does get filled in to show that it's connected. If you look at guard, it says browser got connected. So I don't know if I can, how well I can show this, but if I go to the home page, I can change some text. So I can do like hello world, and when I save the file, my browser refreshes. Okay? So pretty cool. It can do much more than just refresh your browser. It can like lint your code. It can run specs. So it's a really convenient thing to know about because it just saves time. It just saves like the trouble of like going to your browser and pressing keys when you can be doing better things with your life, like writing code. So cool. That's guard. Okay, so SimpleForm is a gem that's used to make forms easier to work with. Okay, so you know that in Rails you can write forms that look like this. So if I have a student, I can write form for add student to do, and then I can do label field, and then submit. So this is pretty typical. This is like a pretty typical standard way to write a form. If you look at this though, it's like, well, I'm writing label and text field over and over again, and it seems kind of redundant. So someone came along and was like, well, I can write a better form. I can write like a better form utility, and so he made SimpleForm. So this is SimpleForm, it's just that. F.input is essentially shorthand for making a label and the right input. But what's cool about SimpleForm is that it'll infer what type of field to use. So if my name is a string in a database, it will know to use a text field. If my name is like a, what other types of fields are there? If my name is like a number, it'll know to do like a number like field that's not just for text. So essentially, it just knows what to do, and it's kind of cool because if you, it even knows about validations. Okay, so if you know in your model that you validate the name, you can put the validation in your model for the name. SimpleForm will add like a little asterisk next to like the label saying that this is required. So it's pretty cool and pretty smart, and it's just nice because you can write less code to do this same thing. So check it out when you can. And we're going to be using it in the rest of this course. So Slim Rails. So Slim is pretty cool. Essentially, it's a replacement for ERB. So the reason why is because, so I don't know what happened to the syntax highlighting here, but one thing I don't like about HTML is that's kind of repetitive in that you have to do like div and then close div and then like do and then end and like h1 and slash h1. What Slim basically does is it does away with all like the greater than less than signs and the closing tags. It just lets you write the ideology behind it was to write the bare minimum in order for this thing to behave the same way. So this in Slim looks like that. So what you'll notice is that the tag goes first, and then the text goes after. If you want to do Ruby code, you do an equal sign instead of like the ERB tag. If you do like dot some class, it guesses that you're going to use a div, so it makes the div tag and then gives it the class. And if you do hashtag some ID, it'll give it the right ID as well. If you need other attributes besides the class and the ID, you can just do that right here. So here's a div, and this is some random attribute in HTML. It's not a class or an ID, but we can do it just by doing this, and it knows to make it an attribute. You had a question?
Yeah. So can we use other like basic HTML within this file, or just restrict this?
Yeah. So what's cool about Slim is that since the less than sign is never used anywhere, basically, what the creators allow you to do is it basically says anything with a less than sign is just HTML, so just treat it, like leave it as it is. So I can literally so point number one is that the file ending is different. So this is a .erb file. This is a .slim file. Now, if I rename the file and just kept the code the same, the page would behave the same way. And that's because when it sees like the less than sign, it just leaves this whatever comes after alone, and it keeps it as HTML, which is kind of cool because it allows you to like kind of transition slowly from HTML to Slim. Yeah.
Okay, but you wouldn't be able to do like the .erb.
Yeah. So the catch is you won't be able to run like EB code like this because Slim will just say, oh, everything that comes after a less than sign is just text, so leave it alone. So that stuff would break, which is slightly like inconsistent, but it is what it is, unfortunately. Yeah. So one other thing to mention is that in ERB, you don't put an equal sign if you don't want this to output anything to your page. The equivalent in Slim is just to put a dash. So dash if function is 20, then you put this. The only thing you notice is that you never have to put the end blocks. It uses indentation to infer like where to put the ends. So notice here, SimpleForm for do f, and I have to end it. And then here, use indentation to know what belongs to that. Yeah.
Does that also apply to like the HTML blocks, like for the paragraph type? I mean, most of us wouldn't write like a paragraph just on one line.
Just on one line, yeah.
So if I were to like do the next line, but it's still indented, would it keep it at time?
Yeah, it would. So notice here, so the way to do text, like longer text in Slim is, so in this example, I put like a div with some text inside. Here, what you do is you put a pipe, and then the text comes after. Okay. And if you keep this text indented the same way down, then it just stays like that text. Okay. Yep. Cool. Any questions about this? Yeah.
When you start with programs, so essentially pipe is what as a text body, right? And so
Yeah.
Text body.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So this is not all there is to Slim. There is more. I'm just covering like the basics to get started. If you want to like, if you're running into some specific errors, check the documentation, which is like pretty extensive. It's linked there. And the reason why I mentioned Slim and I like it is because one, it saves time, like writing HTML, which is kind of a pain. And two, it actually renders faster than HTML. It actually renders, like it takes less time to give the user HTML when you write it in Slim than it does in ERB or the other templating language that people use called Haml. For some odd reason or another. I guess I think the creators emphasize efficiency, so there's more than, like, it's more than just looks, it's also about, a little bit about performance as well. Cool. No further questions? Okay, great. And that's pretty much all I had for lecture today. So thank you guys for coming and have a great spring break. Yes, and we'll be doing check-ins right now.
Oh.